we're going to invite our panelists to come forward. And I'm going to invite, first of all, Njambi. Please welcome her. She's a young professional, photographer, writer, jet setter, and aspiring to work in international affairs and diplomacy. Next up, we're going to welcome Maureen Hamblin. Maureen describes herself as a Kenyan girl who spent most of her life in Dublin, moved to Northern Ireland where she married a Northern Iron husband 9 years ago. Stay-at-home mom, but very active on TikTok and various platforms. Next, we're going to welcome Dr. Lisa Claire Witten. She's a research fellow at Queen's University, and she has a lot of experience of work around the Good Friday Agreement and will be providing us some insights into that this afternoon as we continue our discussions. And last but not least, we're welcoming Siobhan Brown. She's a chartered architect, a singer, and a radio presenter, and recently launched a new festival dedicated to soul and jazz, Soul Train NI. Watch out for that. It's kicking off in February next year. So this is our lovely panel. Please welcome them one more time. And let me invite Yolande to come back out. And at this point, I will take my seat. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is just ask our panelists to just give us a quick sort of commentary. What's your initial reaction as you watch that documentary? Just briefly, if you would. I'm going to start closest to me. Jambi, would you just let us know your thoughts?
Sorry, Angela and Jambi. Can I say we will have possibly at the end a couple of minutes for questions and answers, but that does not preclude anybody who has a question during the panel discussion from raising your hands, and we will take those questions because you might forget. No. So we want it to be interactive and as comfortable as possible.
Yeah, I think that was a brilliant documentary, and I think that it really stirs our mind to think about where each of us start in our life and how different people have different starting points. And sometimes it's so easy to look at someone and think, oh, they didn't choose to go to university, or they didn't, they're not where I am and they're the same age as me. But in actual fact, everyone has a different starting point and has different advantages and disadvantages, which, lead to them to where they are. And I think that it was great that the documentary highlighted those things and acknowledged those things when, it's not always an equal playing field for people whenever they start out. So, yeah.
Thank you, Jambi. Maureen?
Yeah, I had two things stood out for me. The first one is the stability in the home. If you have two parents, how that helps you to navigate the outside world. And I think that's why we saw, some people of color who ended up quite far ahead. And I think it was the stability of the home. And then the second thing was the Northern Irish Zimbabwean girl that said in Northern Ireland, she's a minority, but if she goes back to Zimbabwe, she's not. And that's something I've had to reframe for myself to be like, I'm part of a global majority. In Northern Ireland, I'm not. And, and I stand out very clearly, but I've had to reframe that for myself. And that was.
Thank you, Maureen. Dr. Lisa.
So I was struck by how powerful it can be to learn what you don't know. And it's very hard to know what you don't know. And so we can't know each other's journeys in details unless we ask. But an exercise like that, it really facilitates everyone to have a better realization of their position, their comparative privilege, what they can do with that, the responsibility that comes with that new understanding, but also learning how much you don't know about what it's like to be in someone else's shoes, and just how that can be a really powerful moment of learning.
Thank you. And Siobhan?
I think what stood out for me initially was everybody holding hands, because I think that's a really important place to start. And then the other thing for me was being in a room and being aware of where people are moving. So the word for me is awareness. And none of us live in this world in isolation. We live with neighbors, we live with colleagues, we live with family. So awareness of what's going on around us is what really, came to my mind as I watched that. So I thought that was a really excellent documentary.
Thank you, Siobhan.
I've never actually forgotten this, even being part of the documentary and the facilitators in it. I just never forget Mimi's reaction to James being left behind. And obviously that the context of that is like, I thought you were local, you should have been in the front. And we always have that sort of perception as people of color, assuming, making certain judgments. And I suppose it happens in the reverse. So that was something that I just never got off my mind.
Okay, so we want to get into some discussions this afternoon. But before we do that, we're going to ask Dr. Lisa to give us a brief summary, because what we're looking at is we're 25 years on from the Good Friday Agreement, and also the changes that were brought into effect by the Northern Ireland Act as well. And we're asking the question, where are we now as a people? And specifically because this is a Black History Month discussion and we're talking about saluting our sisters, what, if anything, has changed for people of color, women of color in particular in Northern Ireland. Could you just, first of all, Dr. Lisa, just give us a brief summary of the agreement and the act so that we're all on the same page and then we can move forward from there?
Yes, no problem. If you don't mind, I've written it down because, truth be told, I can talk about the Belfast Good Friday Agreement from now until next week. So to keep it to time in 2 minutes, I'm just going to read a brief line of what we can understand when we talk about the 1998 agreement. So it was signed on the 10th of April in 1998. The Belfast or Good Friday Agreement heralded the end of a 3 decades long conflict between two communities defined by their opposing ethno-nationalist identities and divergent visions for the constitutional future of Northern Ireland. Unionists who identify as British and want Northern Ireland to remain part of the United Kingdom, and nationalists who identify as Irish and want Northern Ireland to join or rejoin a united Ireland. It arose from a long process of talks or negotiations between Northern Ireland political parties that was brokered by the British and Irish governments. And the substance of the 1998 agreement reflects numerous compromises between the previously warring two communities of unionism and nationalism. There are 4 key elements to the agreement. The first underpins the latter 3, and it's generally referred to as the principle of consent, and it amounts to a series of commitments and guarantees regarding the constitutional status and future of Northern Ireland, including recognition, and I'll quote a little bit from the text, the recognition that it is for the people of the island of Ireland alone, by agreement between the two parts, to exercise their right of self-determination on the basis of consent, to bring about a united Ireland if in future they so wish to do. Yet the agreement also noted that the present wish, 1998, of the majority of the people of Northern Ireland was to remain part of the UK. Additionally, the consent principle recognises the birthright of all the people of Northern Ireland to identify themselves and be accepted as Irish or British or both, according to individual choice, and both the UK and Irish governments effectively underwrite that guarantee, and that has interesting implications for citizenship and privilege associated with British and Irish citizenship that I'm sure we can talk about. So more can be said on the principle of consent, but for time, that's element number 1. The next 3 are generally referred to as the 3 strands of the 1998 agreement, and each came with or provided for new governing institutions to be established. Strand 1 provided for new devolved institutions to be set up, the Northern Ireland Assembly and Executive, which would operate on the basis of mandatory power sharing between unionists and nationalist representatives. Strand 2 provided for the establishment of the North-South Ministerial Council and North-South implementation bodies to enable cooperation and collaboration between the two jurisdictions on the island of Ireland in areas of mutual interest. And Strand 3 provided for the establishment of the British-Irish Intergovernmental Conference and the British-Irish Council to enable cooperation between the two guarantor governments of the UK and Ireland, as well as between all of the national and regional governments of these islands, including the Irish government, UK government, devolved institutions of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, as well as the Crown dependencies of Jersey, Guernsey and the Isle of Man. Okay, so that's all the structures. The rationale that underpinned the 3-stranded structure of the agreement was the aim to recognise the equal legitimacy of Unionist Britishness, represented primarily in the Strand 3 institutions, and Nationalist Irishness, represented primarily in the Strand 2 institutions, and the necessity for both Unionists and Nationalists to be engaged and represented in the democratic institutions and governance of Northern Ireland via the Strand 1 institutions. Two final quick points to make on the substance of the 1998 agreement. First, just that alongside the principle of consent and its three strands, one of the more controversial aspects of it was the provision for the early release of prisoners. Second, it is a rights-based international treaty. The 1998 agreement served to foreground individual and collective rights in Northern Ireland law in a manner that is distinct from the rest of the UK and does result in more robust legal protections for human rights in Northern Ireland than in Great Britain, which again is something that I think we can draw out in terms of where we're at today. And the opportunities, that's the 2-minute intro. It's probably more than 2, but.
Well, before we get into the real meat of the discussion, I want to make 3 quick disclaimers. Well, not disclaimers, but I'm probably just saying what other people might be thinking. Just 3 quick things. 1, I want to acknowledge Dr. Lisa's presence as perhaps the lone local female on the panel. The reason for that is we see Dr. Lisa as an ally, her work involving the community. We know this is a Black History Month event, but that does not preclude Dr. Lisa's presence. In case you were thinking that, I have addressed it and justified it. The second thing I want to say quickly is that we acknowledge that the panelists, correct me anybody if I'm leaving anything out, the panelists, none of us here may have lived through the Troubles, and so we don't have that Good Friday experience. Well, except for me, I watched Derry Girls. If you haven't watched Derry Girls, that's my experience. And the final thing I want to say very, very quickly is that we did not want to assume that everybody in the room was fully au fait with what the Good Friday Agreement meant, hence Dr. Lisa's context. Thank you.
Thank you, Yolande. And so following on from that, one of the things that we pick up as she was going through that summary is this principle of establishing parity of esteem between 2 primary communities, as the Good Friday Agreement puts it. And so the question that we're asking the panelists, first of all, is, do you think that this underlying principle of establishing parity between 2 primary communities in itself erodes parity of esteem for ethnic minority communities? Maureen, you look like you want to jump in on that real quick.
Yeah, well, I recently did a video on TikTok and there were a lot of comments of, well done for bringing the Protestants and the Catholics together against Black people and against foreign people. And I think oftentimes, especially if you're vocal about racist events, people see it as a way to to bring everybody together against one group of people. So I'm hoping that for those who are aware of the Good Friday Agreement and those who are working for peace, that there is space for people like me and people like my children who are Northern Irish, and that they can be included in that, and that instead of, when we speak out against racism, instead of somebody thinking, you're bringing us together against you, that it's to say, okay, how is there room for everybody at the table, and can we make more room?
Thank you, Maureen. Siobhan?
Yeah, I would agree with what Maureen is saying. I don't think it erodes. I don't think it erodes how we fit in as Black women, how I fitted in. I think what it has done is opened the door for discussions. It's about understanding everybody's perspective and respecting that. So I may not agree with Lisa on everything. She may not agree with me on everything, but if we understand where and why we think the way we think, then we maybe have an opportunity to move forward. So I think the agreement is a principle that is important for everyone that doesn't fall within the sectarian divide. So yeah, it's an important move.
Yeah, I think I agree with Siobhan. I don't think that the parity of esteem erodes the parity between, you know, 4 ethnic minorities. But I think that that focus on the 2 communities in that time, I think it fails to acknowledge, you know, the progression of Northern Ireland and how there's much more ethnic minorities now. So there are more communities that we have to acknowledge which need to be included in that parity. So I think that we just need to reevaluate how that parity of esteem looks for everyone and not just 2 communities.
Go ahead, Dr. Lisa. I'll make my comment after you. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think the concept and the way parity of esteem is framed and understood in the 1998 agreement, it is it's historically bound. It's a frozen and therefore quite restrictive vision of inclusion, which was necessary to address the situation and scenario of the society of Northern Ireland 25 years ago, and even more than that, probably because the seeds of the agreement were sown in the 60s and the civil rights movement then. But at the same time, as we're saying, the principles of the agreement and its basis in rights and the primacy given to human rights and inclusivity as a principle does allow the opportunity to open that door and to aim to progress and take it forward. So it's almost like it's clearly bound and it's problematic, the vision within the agreement, but it does allow for a foundation in order to build a more flexible and more realistic vision of inclusion for contemporary.
I mean, in my mind, I've got a couple of things that I'm going back and forth. The question is a tricky one to say that that the agreement itself and the principle does erode, you know, parity of esteem for minority communities. I don't think it's a yes or no, but what's in my mind is if we go back even to 2020, at the cusp of the pandemic, and we had those Black Lives Matter protests, and, you know, the police handling of those protests in comparison to, for example, funeral processions involving local, well, you know, important people that passed on. When we talk about the parity of esteem, it really isn't a problem with the local people on the ground itself, in my view. It really stems from the structures that are in place and how the people that are in governments or in institutions like police or whatever, how they actually deliver the service between the different communities. And is it really that they themselves are afraid that, for example, were the police afraid how they would be criticized by the local community as opposed to, you know, the minority community? You know, even having said that, in my view, when I think of the on-the-ground scenario, I see, and here I am probably just delving into a couple of things quickly. I see, you know, the way that locals are now reacting to business people of color wanting to have businesses in Northern Ireland. Is it a situation where, right, we're okay to come, but we're not okay to progress in that way? We're not okay to become business owners so that, you know, for example, the recent set of arson attacks on those businesses. Where are we really going? We are progressing, but there is still a lot of work to do. And again, take, for example, to me, it should start in Stormont. And that's where we don't have representation. So I probably could go on all day, but there's so many things to talk about, you know?
So given that then, and Siobhan, you're probably going to delve into it. So the question is, what has changed? And frame that in whichever way you want, Siobhan. Go ahead and respond to that. I know you wanted to respond to something that Yolanda said.
So I maybe might disagree with what you said, Yolanda, because I don't know that it starts with the government. To me, it starts with me, because the people in the government are individual human beings. And it doesn't matter that they are representing us, they are individuals. And I think that that's the thing that's missing when we talk about diversity and inclusion. I think the thing that's missing is the human element. Like, we're real people. We all want to be accepted. We all want to be loved. We all have a view that we want somebody to listen to. So that's maybe where I would disagree with that. Your question, Angela?
Yeah, so in terms of what has changed, and let me, if I may, just before I go into that, just again, just maybe buttress a little bit what you said. I think there are two levels, if I can kind of marry what the two of you said. So definitely it begins with the individual, with the opportunity, and I think opportunities like this to engage with somebody that maybe you would not normally come across in your daily walk. Taking those opportunities to engage and to learn. I think that's where it begins, because as we do that, as those barriers begin to break down, you begin to understand that we are essentially human. And some of the behaviors that we're seeing are based on various things. Some is it's out of fear. Some it's out of fear of the unknown. Some is out of, I've seen certain images and all I've ever known is this. But so I come to you with those preconceived ideas. But actually, as I begin to engage with you, do I see similarities? Do I see what unites us rather than separates us? So there is that definitely individual responsibility. But I think also in terms of looking at structures, from looking at it from a sort of legal background, when you enact a law, it's then open to interpretation, particularly within the UK legal system. So it's then open to the courts as to how you interpret that law and how you apply that law to individual cases. So we may find, of course, that we've got the Good Friday Agreement that is stuck at that point in time because that was the main focus. But as we move on, we then need to take the principle of parity and begin to interpret that as it's relevant to what we see on the ground now in terms of communities.
Yeah, and just to kind of ride on that wave, when we talk about humanity, we have to acknowledge trauma. And Northern Ireland is a place that has experienced a lot of trauma on both, the Protestants and the Catholics. And when you haven't dealt with your own trauma, it is difficult to hold somebody else and somebody else's humanity. And I would love, I think one of my biggest desires would be to see a lot of healing, a lot of therapy, a lot of counseling. And there's a lot of generational trauma. I married into a very Protestant family that is also very racist. And because of their trauma, they were not able to make room for me or my kids, right? Sorry, I'm not gonna cry. But so I would love to see a lot of healing in that, because then, and not just with native Northern Irish people, but within Black communities as well. We don't talk about the pain of slavery or colonialism. We just, if we ignore it, then it's fine. We've moved on. We have the Good Friday Agreement. We have Stormont. We just think that's all we need. But we need to talk about these things. We need to get people into therapy. We need to train more counselors and psychologists and just really dig deep into the pain. And it's only by feeling the pain and going through the pain can we hold each other's humanity. So, yeah.
Thank you, Maureen. Thank you. I'm conscious you wanted to respond, and I'm going to come to you, Jambi, after she.
Yeah, my honest what has changed, my initial what has changed, the moment I heard about the Good Friday Agreement, my husband's, he's white, Northern Irish.
And you were here, Siobhan, because you've been here since 1992, right?
Yeah, I've been here since I did experience things before we had the agreement. But the minute I heard that announcement, my husband will testify, I said to him, watch now, racism will increase. That was my initial response. So I didn't go, oh, wow, things are going to get so much better for me as a Black woman. And I didn't say that. I just went, watch now. And I'm not hugely political. But I saw it, and that is exactly what happened. The attention went from sectarian issues to, oh, I can't do that anymore. Right, and now I'll pick on you guys. So that's interesting. But also what has changed is it's opened the door to Northern Ireland becoming a multicultural space. I now am, and I found this very fascinating at the time, I'm now where my parents were when they moved from Jamaica to the UK. In the 60s and that's me now. I'm part of the minority who is now seeing the diversity increase. And that's fascinating to me. And I always thought that this was an opportunity for us to do better because we've learned from the past. And we still do have that opportunity, but I have been disappointed that it's not, people haven't seen that as something to jump onto real quick, because especially here in Northern Ireland, because of the troubles, we know what it's like to suffer the trauma that Maureen's been talking about. So we don't want that for ourselves. Why did we not jump on this opportunity? So we've seen that. But then looking at other things that have changed, it's opened the doors that you mentioned, Lisa, for us to now hold dual citizenship. So my family now have dual citizenship. I have dual citizenship. I now am Irish. And I actually will say that now, whereas I didn't say that before. I hold the piece of paper that says I am Irish. And I'm quite proud of that. My name is Irish. Do you know what I mean? My maiden name is actually Irish as well, Bonner. And that's a whole thing. If somebody wants to help me look at my ancestry, I'm very fascinated in that. So yeah, a lot's changed. The business I work in the north and the south. So I can now work freely within the construction industry in the north and the south. So there's been a lot of good things that have happened in terms of what has changed.
Thank you, Siobhan.
Angela, before you go on, I want to call Siobhan out. I call people out for the good and bad. If anybody has seen Siobhan on social media wearing her t-shirt, more blacks, more dogs, more Irish, I think it's a massively interesting piece of work. I wish it would really take off. Siobhan, you should have brought some of those t-shirts here today because I really want one.
Thank you, Siobhan. I'm going to come to you, Jambi. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, just quickly building on what Siobhan's saying, there are a lot of things that really haven't changed, and we've seen a lot of racism even recently. There was some attacks in South Belfast, and a lot of my friends have experienced different things even recently. But in terms of what's changed, I think that especially for my generation, the vision has changed in terms of where we want to be. I think that we want more inclusivity of voices, even the fact that we're all able to be here today together, especially, a mix of people. The vision has changed, and I think that people of our generation are really a lot more eager to move forward and live harmoniously despite what has happened, and not only focus on that, but also with the importance of what Maureen is saying, also to heal from that as well.
Thank you, Jambi. Just at this point, I want to throw it out to the audience. We've got a few minutes left. Really just want to give an opportunity. If you have any questions for the panelists, or if you have any contributions that you want to make to the discussion so far.
So I moved to Northern Ireland in 2013-14, and I can only remember one or two incidents of racism. And then we went off to America to do our master's, and Brexit happened when we were there. And we came back, and I kid you not, like stuff like it would, for example, trying to get into the NHS to have a baby, I had to keep proving that I was an Irish citizen. And one time it was during I was getting my bloods taken out, and they came in to ask, do I have a form of ID, even though I've been in the system. I'm an Irish citizen. Every single week I will have some form of microaggression or some sort of comment. I do live just outside Belfast, where you don't have as many as much diversity. But yeah, I did notice a shift, and it gave people the boldness to be vocally loud and vibrant with their racism, especially with my in-laws. So yeah.
Yeah, that is the reality for so many people. Where do I think it's going? I would say it's up to you. It's up to each person individually where it goes. Like I say, I've done a bit of cultural awareness training during the 2020 Black Lives Matter and all that. That cultural awareness training made a huge difference to me. Huge difference. What it made me do was look at me first. And Maureen mentioned, you can't deal with somebody else's trauma until you deal with yourself. So I would say, where is it going? It depends on how each one of us individually choose to take it. So we can say, I'm not going to tolerate that anymore. My husband is very, very active in out and out anything that he sees that isn't right as a white man. It doesn't matter if it's to do with black. If he just sees two white people fighting or whatever it is, he chooses to out it. So I think that that's what's important. How I respond to what I see isn't right. And I could give you many examples, right? What I would say is just to finish off, we talked about what has changed. So where the space is taking us is like, I am now within the construction industry and different things that I do. I now sit on various boards. Okay. I'm in the construction industry, yes, because of my credentials, but also because I do tick a box because they are now discussing cultural things. So now they say, well, we need to have a black person or somebody of color on this board. Siobhan, you're an architect, you're into conservation, you come on. So these are the positive things that we can look at. The landscape is there for us to start talking about it and saying, am I really going to take this seriously, or am I going to tick a box? So it's up to us.
I was in the Black Northern Irish and Proud documentary, and there was, I think it is important to mention, you know, there was a young woman called Swanile, and she was applying for a job, and you know, she didn't get the job. So, you know, she was entitled to ask, what was the reason that I didn't get this job? And she was told, well, you were qualified, you know, you had everything that we needed, but we couldn't pronounce your name. And, you know, the fact that that still happens today is unbelievable. And even in my workplace, I had to recently report like a very serious race, some very inappropriate comments someone was making towards me in relation to race, which made me very anxious at work. And you know, it's so easy for us to just think, oh, talking about diversity inclusion is just a hot topic. And, you know, it's just, okay, right, let's get in as much diversity as we can, as much representation, without thinking about how, you know, this is actually that platform for us, that ability for us to speak like this is really disempowering the way that we've been treated and the ways that we've been held back at times as well. And yeah, I know other people with similar stories, so I felt that was important to mention.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you. Dr. Lisa, final words from you. Very quick. 30 seconds if we can.
30 seconds. I would say Northern Ireland has changed and is changing. And the fact that we're here today and having these conversations testifies to that. And that is a basis for hope, I think. And just like we've been talking about in the points being made, the pace of change and the nature of that change is going to be up to each and every one of us and the choices we make. And we have power to make this a better place, to make this a better society, more inclusive, more diverse. And I think that's the trajectory we're on. Notwithstanding the major issues are still there, I think we can keep going on that progressive and positive path.
And it's important to celebrate that we are progressing, right? Pace may not be what you wanted, but we're moving in the right direction. Thank you. Maureen.
Yeah, I just want to highlight the effects of racism on the mental health. I think we don't realize just how draining on a person's identity. Somebody talked about identity on a person's mental health. Some days I had a big incident in June, and it took me, I have to go out every day because I have 3 young boys, and every day was a struggle to get myself out. And so if you see any racism happening, like, call it out. Be our allies. Don't just watch. Because it has real life effect on us, on our mental health, and it's really damaging and heartbreaking. And I want Northern Ireland to be different for my kids.
Thank you, Maureen. Jamie.
Yeah, I would say thank you, UK Pivot, for inviting us here. And I think that we just need to continue having open conversations and difficult conversations. And at the same time, I'm grateful for the people within this community, white, black, whoever they've been, people like Siobhan, people like Alex, people like Maureen, people like our poet here that are really spreading awareness and making a difference. You know, there's a lot of people behind the scenes who we might not see, that might not deserve, you know, to get the noteworthiness that they deserve, but that change that they're making is having an impact on all of us, and is why we're able to sit here today as well. So I'm grateful for all of those people.
Thank you, Champion. And Siobhan?
Yeah, again, thank you, UK Pivot, for having me and us. We've had a really, it's been, you know, you could talk about this subject for a long time.
All day long.
Yeah. One of the things I want to leave you with in terms of celebrating Black History Month is, as a people, we have contributed so much to society that you all participate in on a daily, and you maybe don't realize it. Not least the radio. You hear music. Music is our food. It's our food, and you have all been listening to music of Black origin pretty much all of your lives, whether you've known it or not. So I just want to encourage people to remember that, as much as we as a Black people have been enjoying, you know, Irish culture, Northern Irish culture, British culture, you know, it's we're all in this together. Like that documentary says, we hold hands. We hold hands together, and we should continue to hold hands together and individually improve things as we move on.
And just to say thank you once again to Leash and to the Good Relations Unit for facilitating this discussion. Thank you very much to all of you for coming to spend your lunchtime with us. And please, if you do have the time, don't rush off. Please go ahead and speak with us. This has been recorded here today, this discussion, and it will eventually go up on our platform, On Mute Now, which is on YouTube, On Mute Now, and you'll be able to find it there, as well as the documentary and various other discussions there. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.